Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our first CMA webinar. Today's webinar is supported by the Global Maritime Forum and Marine Money, and the topic is a timely one. It is Sea Cargo Charter, a commercial look at the way ahead. My name is Joyce Wang, and I'm the social chair of the Connecticut Maritime Association. I also work as the business application manager at Eagle Bulk Shipping, one of the proud signatories of Sea Cargo Charter. I'm very excited for today's talk. Before we begin, I would like to say a few thank yous. First to Louis Dobler from Global Maritime Forum, Lauren Parsons from Marine Money, John Chia, also from Marine Money, and Chris Alvasano, our CMA president. Their hard work in the planning and coordination enable us to get this webinar up and running. I would also like to say thank you to all of our panelists for joining our discussion today. We are very excited to host this event as the Sea Cargo Charter becomes an important subject in our community to promote decarbonization in the maritime industry. Finally, I would like to thank everyone on the webinar today for watching a recording. Further, today the CMA is pleased to announce the second webinar on the topic of ESG in shipping. On June 8th, the CMA will partner together with NEMBA to host another webinar on this topic, ESG, that we hope will be enlightening and informative. Details to be sent soon. Oh, a quick word about our membership. If you're not a member, please join. It is $100 a year, and your dues allow us to bring you events like this. More importantly, allow us to offset the costs of in-person events. In some cases, such as the holiday party or the annual general meeting, members attend those for free. As we return to normal and we get back to those in-person events, we need dues to help us sustain the CMA. Without any further ado, I'm honored to introduce our moderator for the webinar today, Jim Lawrence. Hi, Jim.
Hey, Joyce. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you, Eagle Bulk, for being a signatory to the Sea Cargo Charter. And you know, I'd like to thank you and the board at CMA, Chris Aversano, and also Joanna and Louise at the Global Maritime Forum for convening this discussion, which will now follow. And welcome to everybody to this Connecticut Maritime Association webinar on the Sea Cargo Charter. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be your host today. And I only wish that I could look out and see each and every one of you, but I know that's coming soon, and I hope you're all well. It's important to acknowledge the significant contribution of our participants today and their companies. The pace to deliver on the Paris Agreement is intensifying. The Sea Cargo Charter is another important step. The Sea Cargo Charter was launched in October 2020 and now counts 22 signatories from around the world. It's a product of talent convened by the Global Maritime Forum. It's industry-led. The Sea Cargo Charter demonstrates our vital maritime community's passionate commitment to the goal of market-led climate solutions. We can and should take pride in the initiative. The Sea Cargo Charter architects and signatories listen to the call of consumers, clients, shareholders, and a generation coming along behind us, taking up the challenge with energy, creativity, goodwill, and expertise. We hope their leadership will in turn inspire governments and IMO to also do the right thing. Now, just before we start, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit questions via the chat feature on GoToWebinar. On the side where you can find the chat feature, you will also find the ability to download the Sea Cargo Charter document, which I encourage each and every one of you to do. I will ask those questions that we have time for, but I know that in the incredibly organized way that Global Maritime Forum and the Sea Cargo Charter Secretariat work, that any questions we don't get to will be found ultimately at the seacargocharter.org website in the chat area. And now with that, I'd like to turn to our panelists and ask that with their first question, that they please give our audience a quick introduction to yourselves and what your role in our business is. And we're absolutely honored to have with us today Jan Dieleman with Cargill, Lance Nunez with Dow, Eva Biscard from Maersk Tankers, Captain Rajav Gulati from Anglo-American, and Johanna Christensen from the aforementioned Global Maritime Forum. So with that, I'm going to jump straight in and ask Jan, I know you've been together with Trafigura, one of the initiators of the Sea Cargo Charter. Could you explain briefly what the Sea Cargo Charter is and tell us about what motivated you to start this journey?
Well, thanks, Jim, for having me. Thanks, Marine Money, for organizing, and thanks, CMA, for giving us the platform here. I think it's very much appreciated. So I'm responsible for freight in Cargill, which is a relatively large business, as some of you might know. On top of that, I've also been appointed the chair of the Sea Cargo Charter and been very involved from the onset, I would say, with the idea. Together with Trafigura, we've been very active. The Sea Cargo Charter is really designed as a tool to report and track emissions from chartering emissions, to really see what is actually happening when you're chartering ships and creating transparency around that. And hopefully that transparency is also going to give increased accountability going forward. That's all nice said and done, but why do we think that was really needed? And I can tell you a little bit around the story that we were on in Cargill. We've been looking at emissions for the last 5 years, and I tell you, the more we looked at it, the more complicated it actually became. And the more we started looking at other people, is we saw that other people were working with different benchmarks, we're working with different methods, and everybody was all over the place with all good intentions, because I think the industry is really moving into the right direction. But we needed something standardized where we all can say, okay, this is emissions, this is how we're going to measure it, these are the rules of reporting, and this is how we're going to disclose all this information in a standardized way. So that was the need that we really tried to fulfill with this, and I can see that we're gaining quite some traction lately, which is great to see.
Thank you for that. It is very encouraging to hear your passion for it. Raghav, you were also involved from the early stages in the Sea Cargo Charter. What kind of measures has Anglo-American already carried out to implement the SCC requirements into your freight operations?
Yeah, thanks, Jim, for the question and for having us here. So just a little introduction first. I'm Captain Raghav Gulati. I'm heading the safety and technical desk for Anglo-American Shipping, which is based in Singapore. We have been a part of Sea Cargo Charter right from the drafting stage. So I think it's been a very exciting journey for us from the time we have started to develop the principles of the Sea Cargo Charter to actually having it discussed, socialized, and implemented into the operations. Since the development of these principles, we have been using the Sea Cargo Charter as our vehicle to calculate our emissions and also to measure alignment to the IMO decarbonization trajectory. So for us, Anglo-American as a group, we are very focused on reducing our emissions and decarbonizing our ocean freight, as it is a very important factor of our Scope 3 emissions as a business. And we have been working extremely hard in the last few years to focus on some meaningful projects, meaningful activities, working and collaborating with the industry, which we believe is a fundamental to really try to get the dial moving in the right direction. And I think our involvement that we have with projects like Getting to Zero Coalition or being a founding signatory of the Sea Cargo Charter has actually driven that message across and setting us on the right path. So why do we actually need to move towards measuring our emissions? And this will lead towards on what we do for the implementation of the Sea Cargo Charter. Well, it is very important for any decarbonization strategy or for developing a roadmap or to set the targets to know where the starting base is. And having that standard framework, as just Jan alluded to, and which is transparent, and also having that accurate methodologies to calculate the emissions, not only improves the confidence of the numbers that we need to start with, but also allows us to track the decarbonization trajectory consistently across the goal provided by the IMO and transparently benchmarking it against the industry. And Sea Cargo Charter delivers that framework. So under the chartering business model, we normally have different type of charters, like a time charter where you're in control of the voyage and its execution and then you have like voyage fixtures or contracts where the capacity on the charter party chain becomes of a freight provider and the execution is done by someone else, not controlled by us. So it's relatively easy, as you would guess, to gather the required data for the time charter voyages, as the information is already available on the chartering books. But when it comes to these voyage fixtures or contract, it becomes a challenge to fetch that data especially in a long charter party chain where there are multiple parties in between us and an information provider. So this aspect actually was discussed a lot in detail during the drafting stages, and a clause was recommended within the Sea Cargo Charter principle, which is to be used to drive that message beyond the direct counterparties. We at Anglo American, as one of the first steps in our chartering contracts, we have embedded this clause, and which is non-negotiable for us. Further, we have worked on onboarding our internal commercial teams for them to really understand what the requirements are and what the importance of data has. And that has actually really driven the individuals to take the ownership, which is critical to drive a standard message from the organization. In addition, we believe awareness around the principles is also a key driver. Since the release of the Sea Cargo Charter, we have observed a lot of hesitance around sharing the data from the counterparties, and that's mainly because they are unaware of the principles. And having that right discussion with these stakeholders are proving very effective to get that data flowing transparently between the counterparties. Another thing, during the journey of the carbon accounting, what we have learned is also that getting that data, apart from getting that data, it is equally important how you manage that data effectively. And depending with the volumes that gets traded, this data can become really overwhelming at times. So it becomes a key to onboard the right systems, platform processes. Maybe it is an in-house or external, depending company to company. But it is important to have that process managed efficiently and effectively. So just to sum it up, and I will pause after this, having the internal teams, systems, and counterparties onboarded to the Sea Cargo Charter principles, coupled with the right messaging on a contract, is the key for an effective implementation of the Sea Cargo Charter.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It sounds like almost a new business for the technology companies to come in and help manage the data. Eva, before we go up in that, you joined the Sea Cargo Charter more recently. What motivated you to become a signatory?
Yeah, thank you, Jim, and thank you also for inviting for this panel discussion. Hugely interesting. So I think I'll start by saying I probably mirror a lot of the sentiments that you could hear from Jan. So having looked at really what is it that this whole industry is up against, looking at emissions, what does it really take to get sustainability onto the agenda, is also something that has naturally, really filled up some of the space for Maersk in general. And also for us here in Tankers, we've also just released our new purpose, where we definitely also have our whole planet really at heart, because I think it's super important to notice that sometimes the discussions here have a tendency of being, is it profit or is it sustainability? And basically we believe that goes hand in hand. So I think when we first saw the initiatives coming from Cargill discussing the Sea Cargo Charter, we were right there, bringing also into the cargoes into this whole discussion, because I think to some extent we might have, as owners of vessels, sort of felt that we were standing a little on our own, so needing to retrofit the vessels and really get in there. So I think it was very much a question of the right ambition level really set by the Sea Cargo Charter that made it super attractive for us, because it was bringing a lot of the different parties together. And I think our core belief that, at sustainability and an emission issue like we have at hand in shipping right now, it's a common issue that we have for the industry, and common issues need common solutions. And before we can really get to those common solutions, we need a common understanding of the issue that we actually have at hand. And I think the transparency that we're really trying to drive through the Sea Cargo Charter will really help us, because it's going to direct us towards how we anticipate and how we look at emissions, thereby securing that we as a full industry, also bringing in, tech parties, they will actually be able to help us secure that we can drive the business forth and secure sustainability. So I think that is probably the main drivers of why we chose to join, even though we're coming from a little different perspective. So we're mainly being the commercial managers of pools right now, but definitely something that we're bringing onto the agenda.
I now realize I wish we had 5 hours to keep this discussion going. But I want you to know that normally in a market like today, people would want to know what are the freight markets going to do when you get a group of you together. But I didn't get a single question on that. Everyone wanted to talk about sustainability. So thank you, Eva. Lance, what impact would you expect the Sea Cargo Charter to have on your business and decision making going forward? And how was it received by your business partners?
Yeah, thanks. So good morning, everyone, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to participate. I'm Lance Nunez. I'm the Global Marine and Terminal Logistics Director at Dow being one of the world's biggest chemical producers and one of the biggest specialty chemical shippers in the world. So Sea Cargo Charter has started driving increased internal focus on the respective emissions and ESG programs of our carriers. Emissions reductions are now prominently featured in our supplier relationship management discussions. What's been interesting and I think welcome is that so far core carriers have welcomed these discussions and have already got a long list of reduction actions that they're able to speak to. While we still have plenty of work to do, it's encouraging to see that carriers are already making this sort of progress now. Specifically with respect to Sea Cargo Charter, the general sentiment from our carriers has been that they understand that emissions reporting is inevitable. What seems most scary for them was the lack of standard methodology for data gathering and calculation. If reporting is to be sustainable, it needs to be straightforward and standard across their customer base. That Sea Cargo Charter offered an opportunity to standardize makes it an interesting proposition for the carriers. And so far, conversations about parcel tanker calculations have been constructive, with carriers stepping forward to be an active part of the conversation. Suffice it to say, there are some carriers that have not been so enthusiastic, but so far they seem to be more the exception than the rule. And as I think was mentioned earlier, usually stems from just not really understanding what Sea Cargo Charter is about. And after explaining that further, right, they become more receptive. Thanks for the question.
No, Lance, thank you. And that's a very positive sort of projection. Joanna, the Global Maritime Forum is behind several other decarbonization initiatives, and I tip my hat to you. Just how do those fit in with the current trends within the industry more broadly? Yeah, you're muted.
I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I had muted myself. There you go.
You're a master.
And it's just as well, because Eva already fully explained why the Global Maritime Forum exists. So I really have nothing to add at this stage. Eva made such a good pitch. I want to hire her in future if I can afford her. Which is really this idea of that sustainability, transparency, full value chain collaboration. There are so many challenges that seaborne challenges that will require collaboration across the full value chain, all the stakeholders coming together, the financial institutions, the cargo interests, the ship owners, the engine manufacturers, regulators, and others. And that's really been the basis for why the Global Maritime Forum exists, creating this leadership platform for all these stakeholders to come together, work together, and find solutions to those shared challenges that are not only for the industry, but are challenges for humanity. And that's been the starting point for the Global Maritime Forum. We've been so fortunate to be able to work with some of the companies and other stakeholders that are here today. That's obviously awesome. They've been wonderful in providing their leadership on initiatives such as the Getting to Zero Coalition, the Poseidon Principles, the Sea Cargo Charter, etc. But we hope this is just the beginning. Really, I think what we see in all of these initiatives is this desire for moving faster and further together, and for creating vastly better governance and transparency across the sector. And I think that's really the thing that we see as the thing that we can work together on with everybody here in this panel today, but many others as well that have joined forces together with us at the Global Maritime Forum.
Well, I tip my hat. I will say I've been in this business for 30 years. And, for much of that, we've sort of suffered a reputation deficit disorder. And it's wonderful to see the industry so far out front on such an important sort of initiative. I want to jump into some general questions, and feel free, any one of you, to kind of raise your hand or just jump right in. But I think maybe we ought to start with the general one, which is, as signatories, what are the challenges you're facing with the data collection, sharing, transparency? Because that seemed to be a theme amongst a lot of you. Jan, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just to put things a little bit in perspective. when we put the Sea Cargo Charter out and we had the drafting group and everything, what we really tried to do is find a balance of being accurate, but also being pragmatic. And this is a very complex topic. So we really try to avoid getting pulled into all kind of rabbit holes, to be very honest with you. So we said, this is the start of a journey, right? So what we have today in the Sea Cargo Charter is not the end game. It's not the end state. This is a journey and we're going to go through this. And there's a lot of things that still need to get tackled. It was mentioned by Lance, for instance, on parceling. That is something that we knew was to be tackled. So we have a group of people looking at that, and I'm sure we'll find an answer for that. We're having some other things like vessel the banding where they are, and we know from the Poseidon principles there's some issues. And we have some stories still to clarify with the IMO, because we did hook up to the IMO, right? And if there's an unclarity in the IMO, by definition, it means there's going to be unclarity in the Sea Cargo Charter because we link them up. So this is a good way for us as well to go back to the IMO and say, hey, you need to clarify this because this is a problem. So I think that is good. Mm-hmm. So I think that's important to set the scene. So this is not the end all. So some of the early on challenges that we had, I think was what Captain Rajev said, is getting sometimes the data flowing through the industry. And I think I don't see a lot of people unwilling to do it, but people are a bit uncomfortable with it, I think. So we have to explain what it is. And I think the last thing, but I would really like to emphasize again, is what we don't want the Sea Cargo Charter to be is a league table of who is the best and who is bad. Because if we're going that way, we're going to go ending in a very bad place. I think this is all around creating transparency, understanding what the drivers are to reduce emissions and use that to go forward. And I would hate to see a table out there saying that company A is 10 times better than B, not knowing the nuances and all the things behind it. So I think that's important to keep stressing.
Before I have a question for you on that, Johan, in a second, but Eva, you have a large pool and therefore a very diverse sort of picture on from the owner's side. Can you give some perspective of what Jan just said?
Yeah, and I think I totally agree. I think the worst place we could end up here is actually by starting, naming and shaming game getting out of this, because that won't get us anywhere. We're actually trying to look for solutions. We're trying to bring out and bring down emissions. So I think the important thing here is for us to really be able to bring forth the relevant data that we need. And at least that is where we started. So we just signed, our first report is going to be out beginning 2022 based on the different data points that we're collecting here in 21. What we can already see now is that the amounts of data that we're already trying to get in now, it really takes many touch points across both our vessels and pools. So I think it's just a couple of nice numbers to know. So we are driving vessels. We have some 230 vessels in our different pools. And each and every day we collect some 100 data points out of the noon reports. So meaning in the due course of a year, we'll actually be collecting some 10 million different data points in order for us to be able to secure the foundation for the data for the Sea Cargo Charter. So that is, I can say, it's not only, where do we get the transparency? There is definitely a lot of data that we need to get at hand and really structure so that we can get them in and really look at them properly and in an equal, quality and manner. And I think that is probably where we are. But as long as we're getting the right data points in and that we can actually sort of cross the Sea Cargo Charter, agree on how we calculate emissions or how we calculate anything on top of those data, then we are, leapfrogging ahead where the industry is today, because we are calculating very many different perspectives and views on how to look at emissions based on the same data. So I think that is really key here. It's not only the data collection, which is a huge task in itself, but it's also how you calculate and how algorithms go on top of those data, which I think is important.
Yeah. Which brings me back to Captain. You sort of alluded to, if I heard you properly, that there are sort of technological sort of add-ons and systems coming in that will address the magnitude of some of this data and help with the analysis.
Yeah, James. I think as everyone has already alluded to, that the data is one thing, but how to manage that data across, keeping it as standard as possible, In the Sea Cargo Charter, we are working with true factual data, and we are not taking any assumptions in place. That's one thing which keeps us in check of what we can do in our numbers. But when we need data, because there's so much of cargo volumes which are getting flowed through, and there's so much of data coming on a daily basis. If we don't really check at that point of time of how that data is, or we don't validate that data at that point of time, and if it comes out to be totally inaccurate, that data is no value for us to put into the trajectory area. So it's something which we need to have a live validation on the numbers which comes into us, so that we know that the numbers which are coming are correct. If they are not correct, then maybe we can reach out to the counterparties to have it counter checked, and then get the data in. So this is where all the technological advances needs to come in place, and I think that's already started up with many in the industry, with many players pitching in, and it's a very good sign that it's picking up the pace, and as Jans and say that people are not really unwilling, but they are not really clear on what these principles are for, and as they're getting clear, the data is flowing through more smoothly day by day, and we just expect that soon we can get that 100% target of getting the factual data, and we don't have any assumptions going into our calculations.
Lance, before completely leaving this topic, can I ask you, can you draw any sort of learnings at this stage of your participation?
Yeah, so most of our business is in the parcel tanker trade. The trade is specialized in that the vessel is typically not fully empty before she starts loading on her next voyage. So in effect, there's no clear beginning or end to a voyage, which presents some challenges to the standard sea cargo charter calculation methodology. And so most of our efforts thus far have been around working through those challenges. In parallel, we've been working with our software supplier on strategies for being able to receive, calculate, and report results. As we complete the work on the parcel tanker methodology, we will pivot towards implementation with our carriers. And while we expect to be that to be something of a challenge, it's our intention to work with carriers in a retroactive way to do data collection on voyages that have already transpired in 2021, so that we can report as much as possible on our first sea cargo charter report in 2022. As far as for learnings, the biggest one, I think, is that it's going to take time. We work in a dynamic industry with a lot of variation and a lot of complexity, and global consensus on anything is difficult. This is the first iteration of Sea Cargo Charter, and it's a great start, but we have a long way to go, and we've got a lot left to learn and a lot left to do.
Great. You're going to ask, you asked the next question for me, but I want to go to Joanna very quickly, for a moment. How is the Sea Cargo Charter related to the Poseidon Principles? And maybe you could address again the collection of data and how the Poseidon Principles was received this first year, and whether there was any kind of league table anxiety that you had over its announcements.
Yeah, so I mean, fundamentally, the methodologies are very much aligned. So they build on a concept of evaluating climate alignment. So looking at a sort of from a portfolio perspective, the overall climate alignment of a portfolio against a trajectory that is based on the targets set by the IMO at present, or the goals set by the IMO at present. Yes, there was definitely anxiety around this sort of question of league tables and whatnot, but I also think they were really alleviated quite quickly. There's a tremendous amount of interest in the published data, but I personally have not seen any kind of those comparisons or those kind of, I think they were more within the group actually of signatories amongst themselves kind of comparing and saying, oh, you scored higher than me, or you scored lower, or whatever. So there was there was obviously a bit of jostling around performance in that sense. And that was good to see that there's going to be a bit of a competitive edge that comes into this, or competitiveness that comes into this. In terms of the data collection, I think all of the banks that are signatories to the Poseidon Principles and had to do that first year of data collection in order to report out at the end of last year, they were positively surprised. Like, it turned out that, you know, they had a much higher reporting percentage than they had initially anticipated. And whilst their data collection is somewhat simpler than what is being done to by the signatories to the Sea Cargo Charter, because they use annualized information and not to Ava's point, many data points every single day. It still relies on the same business commercial relationship in order to have that information, right? So I think there was definitely some concern, a little bit of worry, but which was completely dispelled at the end of the day, which we're really pleased with. And I think it also speaks to the strength of, you know, what underpins this, which is it's supposed to be a collaboration between stakeholders, and a collaboration in terms of achieving an objective, which I think is also the point that Jan made earlier on.
That's certainly been our observation, and I think it speaks to the continuing addition of signatories that's been communicated well. I've got a question for all of you, and that is, you know, what are your hopes and expectations about how Sea Cargo Charter might actually contribute to policy discussions, you know, at the IMO, ideally? Eva, you want to start?
Yeah, I do. It's fine. So I was waiting to see if Jan wanted to start, but so yeah, now it all comes. Yeah. So yeah, definitely. I think my first sentence would probably be impact through insights, because I mean that is definitely what we feel we are putting onto the table with the Sea Cargo Charter. And in that sense, I think to us, okay, emissions is, you know, per definition, it's a global issue. But right now, I feel that we're definitely seeing different initiatives and at least different ambition levels of initiatives from different parts of the world. So I think at least for us, you know, trying to run a commercial business in a shipping world where we might have to comply with different regulation dependent on region or dependent on nationality, which doesn't really coincide then with something which they're trying to make global, is just going to be super difficult. It's going to strain the whole industry. So I think being able to align, you know, across different regulations is going to be of key importance. But I think also lifting the ambition levels. So definitely the Sea Cargo Charter has really put a different ambition level along with the IMO, you know, really together. So I think being able to move fast and really pushing forward and securing alignment would be something that we are really just hoping, dying for will actually happen as an outcome of this.
Yeah, I think what I would add, Eva, is it's interesting, and I think it was alluded to before, that the industry is at the moment going faster than the regulator is able to go, right? And that's actually quite encouraging. I think it's also good because the Sea Cargo Charter, I think, has good input to the IMO. It gives a different angle. Normally, it's very country by country based. It's very owner based, and this is taking a little bit a different view, also showing that charterers have a say in this, and also making sure that maritime can kind of fit into the bigger supply chain issue. Because if you're an end user, you want to be able to measure all your supply chain emissions, and somehow the maritime piece needs to be able to fit in there. And I think what the IMO has done so far is not ticking that box. So I think what we're trying to do here is bring that perspective, bring those tools, and really also create the sense of urgency. I think that Eva said is that we need to get going if we're about to get to the 2050 target. We need to start now.
Yes.
Captain or Lance, any? I think those were well said answers.
Yeah, I'd only add, well, I'd echo that, that my hope is that IMO sees Sea Cargo Charter as a tangible indication that our industry is interested in reducing emissions, and that we act as a tailwind in the way of intent, but also in way of technical guidance, where Sea Cargo Charter is setting up these measurements and reporting schemes, and they're very detailed, and we're taking action on them. And as a result, we're going to learn a whole lot, and undoubtedly we'll have some learnings that should be able to be shared and leveraged right on the global scale.
Fully agree.
Well, hopefully it was encouraging to all of us and to the initiatives at IMO that John Kerry came out 2 weeks ago and said the U.S. was intending to work that way.
And there are more and more companies, right, coming out with the carbon neutral by 2050 as well.
Yeah, so I think No, and I think to add on that one, we had a vivid discussion very early on in the charter around what should the ambition level be, and there were a lot of participants in that discussion that actually thought that the IMO target was maybe not ambitious enough, and in the end, we did settle for the IMO just to have the consistency because this was what the industry knew, this was what the industry was talking about. But there's always been this notion of should we be not hiring our ambition level? I think one thing to go on what Lance said, I think it's important for people to know when you report under the Sea Cargo Charter, you report real operational emissions. So this is not using any offsets. This is real reductions in supply chains. And if people want to do offsets, that it's all fine, but that is going to be outside the Sea Cargo Charter reporting. So I think that's important for people to realize that this is really focusing on real reductions in the maritime space.
Captain, maybe I could start with you in this question, and then Joanna, maybe you could chime in from your perspective with Poseidon Principles. There has been a sort of a geographic sort of centralization or focus to the start of both Poseidon Principles and Sea Cargo Charter. And I was wondering, Captain, whether you could give us some perspective on what you expect to see out of Southeast Asia, China, North Asia in terms of participation going forward.
I think, Jim, when we compare in terms of geographies, definitely the European region is far more progressed because of the regulations which are already in place in those countries and what they need to follow. The Asian countries are picking up the pace slowly and steady. Countries have started to come out with their own goals, and that's driving that change of thinking what is required. More and more investments are going towards the more sustainable means or just to get started on the transition phase. So that's where we are. So I think the world is moving in the right direction. Some countries are leading the pace and some countries are following. But that bridge of gap can be narrowed down by having the collaborations between different companies coming together, and that's what Sea Cargo Charter also does. It brings not only charters, but it brings wide range of operations which are happening all over the world to measure the emissions on the same scale, and that's going to be the driving factor into that as well. And as for the last discussion, what is going on? So what Sea Cargo Charter also does, what the other measures what IMO has started is that we in these principles we measure as per what we have done in terms of intensities, whereas the other like IMO DCS or the EU MRV are not really going as per the same details of measuring the actual intensity what vessels have pushed out from the emissions. So that's where I think Sea Cargo Charter also has an advantage of getting a fair, better result into looking at what the actual intensities of the vessels are. And I think this entire consortium of having a Sea Cargo Charter with different principles coming together from various parts of the world is going to bring that standardization along.
Just Jim, to add on the global coverage, I would say on this, I was pleasantly surprised if you look at the signatories from where they're coming and with who we have discussions. So it's not all Western based, and I was a little bit afraid of that when we started up the initiative. And I think one fact which I think is telling is one of the first companies that signed up for the Sea Cargo Charter was a Chinese grain house. And I would have not thought that to happen, and it did. So I think it is telling that this is not a Western story. This is something that has global support.
That's great. Joanna, I mean, I think you've seen the sort of the evolution of the Poseidon Principles, right? It was Standard Charter just recently. I mean, it's what Jan has said is, and what Captain has said seems to be true.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've most clearly seen that in the Poseidon Principles so far, although I have to say that the Sea Cargo Charter started with a much more global coverage than the Poseidon Principles did. I'm sure Michael Parker wouldn't like me to say that, but it's true. but indeed, like in Poseidon Principles, we've seen the kinds of announcements and commitments that have been made on a country basis, such as the US, for example, have also been seen in Japan, in Korea, in China, and many other countries. And with that then comes the corporate commitments. So pretty shortly thereafter, we saw a rush of Japanese banks signing up to the Poseidon Principles. We're expecting well, I hope a rush of Chinese and Korean banks signing up soon, and likewise. So we see that kind of there's a natural kind of evolution in that sense, that once countries commit, you get this kind of a whole economy commitment to a set of principles, to a climate trajectory, climate reduction trajectory de facto. And then I'm also super encouraged by some of the things that are happening in Singapore right now, the recent announcement of the Maritime Decarbonization Center there. I think those are all really exciting opportunities, and I think we'll see many more companies wanting to make the kinds of commitments to transparency and collaboration that the signatories of the Sea Cargo Charter have.
And that is why my children are watching this. That's great to hear. Hey, we're getting questions in from the audience, and I'll try to word them right. And I refuse to put my glasses on because I'm vain on camera, so I'll try to read them as I can. But the first one is really sort of technical. And what are the differences between reporting of the Sea Cargo Charter and the EU MRV and the IMO DCS? Someone want to tackle that one?
Captain, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So, so the main difference between the EU MRV and IMO DCS, that they are more of annual aggregations, which basically do not give you the granular insight, which reflects the day-to-day reality for the charters. The Sea Cargo Charter, on the other hand, obliges reporting on voyage basis, thus providing the emissions data that we as charterers or signatories can use to make better climate aligned decisions. So I think that's the difference between the main difference between the two.
Great.
I think the one thing I would add is a lot of the measures that are also coming out of the IMO are very focused on the asset and how the asset is run, whereas this is also taking into account where you load the cargo, how quick you load it, how quick you discharge, what the ballast lag is. So it's looking much more in the supply chain optimization, where the asset still is a very important piece, and we all know that, but it's not the only one.
So this is really a two-part question. The first one is, what are some of the ways that you as a secretary of the Sea Cargo Charter, architects, working on evolving the charter? And the second part of that question really is, what changes in ship operations, ship investments, and commercial arrangements do you expect and hope to see as a result of the evolution of the Sea Cargo Charter?
I can start. What I see at the moment is very encouraging, because we're seeing a lot of products and services being developed around the Sea Cargo Charter. Some of them is around the verification, which is something we didn't make compulsory now, but is kind of expected to be common practice going forward. But also very much developing tools on how you can actually impact the numbers that you are producing, right? So how can you reduce emissions? So I'm seeing a lot of these things being developed, and what it does is I think it brings the emissions discussions from operations, where it has been traditionally sitting with a lot of companies, I think much more into the commercial decision-making space. And I think that is a huge step forward. And I think that is going to be the key, because if we're going to put environmental issues as part of commercial decision-making, I think we're going to be in a much better place, much faster than if it doesn't show up there.
Yeah, and I can definitely second that. So that is also what we're seeing. So we have also in our operation been using digital tooling to bring down the bunker consumption, which is naturally within shipping what really causes the whole emission issue here. So for us to be able to, really utilize those kind of solutions to optimize what operationally goes on the vessel. But I think one of the other things that we're probably going to be seeing is also how can we secure, especially when we are running pools with many vessels, how can we actually secure that we, just by choosing the right vessels for the right journey, are actually reducing ballast lags, or just making sure that more emission ships actually take the shorter routes, whereas the more efficient ones are the ones that do the longer routes. So I think that kind of optimization is definitely also something which really brings in emissions onto the commercial agenda.
Yeah, I mean, historically, right, it's been service and cost were the main reasons for how we chartered vessels. Going forward, right, it's quickly becoming service and cost and sustainability, right? Because when your company makes pledges to be carbon neutral by a certain year, all of a sudden, right, there's a zero emissions club that's formed, right? You can't get where you need to go unless the carriers that you're using have this sort of longer term look on sustainability, and they're making that play to reduce emissions. So I do expect it to change the game significantly in the years that come. Also, as a charterer, like, where are we shipping? Why are we shipping? Again, it's largely been about service and cost. But I mean, while the asset, right, is probably the most important measure, it's not the only measure. And if there are ways that we can design our supply chain better, right, also from a third win of sustainability, we're very interested in doing that sort of thing.
Lance, thank you. And this may be a question for everybody, and it follows on what you just said, Lance. And it's two parts again. And the first part is, how do panelists see the compliance and administrative responsibility for the cost of carbon emissions to be shared between owner and charterer? And the second question really that begs is, would charterers, owners, and operators use the Sea Cargo Charter results to sit down and, based on the EEOI results, establish a dialogue to assess and possibly improve logistics? I think you both touched on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when it comes to emissions and getting where we all want to go, right, we're all on the same team in this aspect. It's not carriers versus charterers or charters. We need each other, right, to continue to do our respective businesses. And at least from our perspective, right, we always try to be balanced and fair and transparent in any sorts of negotiations. And as emissions is a global issue impacting all industries, not just ours, right? Everybody has a part to play, and ultimately everybody will bear some amount of the cost. But working together, right, we'll get there.
I think what I would add, I think I'm fully with Lance that I think this is going to change the industry. We're probably going to see much more strategic partnerships with suppliers and users, and having discussions on the green premium of some of these new investments that have to be made and who's going to pay what. And I think that is all happening. I do think specifically on the data collection, where we're really talking about in the transparency in the Sea Cargo Charter, I think if we can get the scale that we really like to get to, it's actually a very efficient way, I think, for the industry, and the cost will actually be very low to do that. So if we can do that and get the right technologies on top of this, I think this is a very efficient and effective way to actually collect that data that in the end of the day, we will all need. So I think this initiative will actually help with that.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So just what I'll totally echo with Lance as what he just alluded to, is that it's an industry target. It's not a charterer's target. It's not an owner's target. So I think it's a shared responsibility, and it has to be a collaboration between the industry, which has to come along. The biggest challenge what we have at this moment is the uncertainty what the future holds for us, whether it's infrastructure or the commercial viability on some solutions, and that we need for decarbonization. So it becomes like a chicken and egg kind of a situation. Who starts first? Who takes the risk? And that's where the first mover disadvantage comes in. So we finally have the demand of this decarbonization comes from the customers and customers. So if we don't start on this journey now, collaboratively, some other people stand to just wait and watch. They will be left behind, and then it'll be difficult for them to catch up. So it has to start with all the collaborations and people coming together, whether it's carbon pricing or paying levies or starting to set up consortiums to get all the solutions together to form it as a industry-wide solution, not specific to charter owners.
But I think what Captain Rajab says is spot on, right? I think in the end, what is going to be very key is going to get regulations around some of these things to really make sure that the future looks a bit more certain for people and to be able to do those investments, right? Because today it's very difficult to make those investments with all the uncertainty there. So I think the regulatory framework will be clearly something that's going to be next on the agenda for this industry to move forward.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. So I think the predictability right now is super low. So it's not only the things that are intransparent, it's also the predictability of what is going to take us to move forward. And I think one of the other things, about also having this sort of common footprint for the industry with the Sea Cargo Charter, where that is really good, is because we need to move very, very quickly at a huge issue, which means that we won't only have one solution. We're going to have to use a wealth of different solutions in order for us to be able to get there. So we have to have many parts of the industry moving, towards the same goal, but actually coming up with different solutions in order for us to be able to really reduce to zero by 50, because otherwise we're never going to get there. So I think getting everybody and that many parties aligned on the same journey with the same goal, that is also quite some task really to set forth.
Yeah. I can't help one sea story. I remember about 25 years ago in the depths of just another tanker market, turning to an oil major and saying, why don't you have a minimum safety rate? And the guy goes, Jim, I understand completely what you're talking about, but the market's the market. So it's nice to hear that there's some sort of shift. So here's a technical question, and I will put my glasses on to get it right. Is the entire AER or EEOI value representing the ship's carbon intensity, or are these more influenced by chartering commercial requirements? What would the Sea Cargo Charter bring that would positively minimize the carbon footprint of just general transport?
Well, I think what the Sea Cargo Charter is trying to do is on a voyage by voyage basis to show the behavior of your emissions and what is basically produced the emissions. Was it the port stay? Was it the speed that you use? Was it whatever, right? And I think this is going to really show the levers that we have to make those decisions. So I think that is the real first step that we're actually trying to do. I think the difference between what we said earlier on the asset side, this is bringing in some of the additional factors that you can use, which are not just the ship, but also how we run our supply chains. And one of the things is, if you would scale up, and we're spending a lot of time ourselves in my company on this, is parceling, right? If you can move cargoes on bigger ships, which are more efficient, you will have an impact on emissions. So I think there is a lot of these things that are going to spin off from this and show you what kind of tools you have to actually do this. So this is really around creating transparency, and I think that is the key thing to make better decisions.
Anyone else? I mean, that's encouraging. We've got a number of questions that are sort of related to this. Would seem a no-brainer for those people with a modern fleet, and slightly more complicated for those people with older vessels, which will just by their age be less fuel efficient. Is there I mean, I suppose it goes to your comment, Jan and Lance, that there are logistics, but Joanna, yes, sir, your hand up.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question, because I think one of the things that we've heard from the banks that are signatories to the Poseidon Principles is that they actually, for them, they see the Poseidon Principles also a way as incentivizing retrofits. So bringing older vessels into play, and in part that's perhaps because the signatories of Poseidon Principles have a longer term commitment on a vessel, obviously the lifetime of the loans, but then also to clients, and thus wanting to make sure if they're to stay aligned with the trajectories that are part of the Poseidon Principles, they're going to need to think about the whole fleet, not only parts of the fleet, and not only about new vessels or new loans. They're going to need to look at the whole portfolio, and it's really quite encouraging to see how that the best way is really it provides an incentive for retrofitting of older fleet as well.
Yeah, this isn't always black and white. But we have at least one carrier who actually cites that their fleet is a bit older as an advantage, just because they'll be in a position to replace more ships sooner, and will have it'll almost be a competitive advantage for them, because they'll be able to pick cleaner vessels from the get-go, and they feel like they've invested right in the ships that they have already that are going to be sailing. So there's a lot of different ways to sort of figure these angles.
I'm with you there. I think another thing that with the Poseidon principles, what we're also seeing more and more is that banks who basically provide loans to charterers in the end of the day are also asking questions on the environmental footprint. And I think if you can show that you're doing this with the Sea Cargo Charter footprint, I think it gives a lot of comfort to banks that actually they are lending to the right people as well. And we see more and more of that as well. So.
Yeah, and I can also say, Jim, that from a commercial manager perspective, this is exactly what we hope that we are going to be able to help vessel owners with is, okay, this is how the emissions actually look. This is what you can do to improve the performance. Also because we don't really know in which direction we are going anyway, you know, on how does the new vessel, how does the new combustion engine need to look? We don't even know that now. So it might be really good for us to just secure the best retrofitting and just bringing down the emissions on the current ships, because quite frankly, otherwise we won't be able to have enough tonnage to go around with what we need to transport. So I think there's a super strong task here for any commercial manager to help navigate the waters of regulation, emissions, and how the ships and vessels are actually best retrofitted to secure the value of the actual vessels.
But I think, Eva, what you say is really key, I think, because whatever investment we make in getting things more efficient now, even on the old fleet, is going to make the problem of the newer fuels and stuff a lot smaller, right? So if we can just be more efficient, you just minimize the problem that we're having to tackle. So I think these efforts are key, and they should be continuing to going on, and not everybody just waiting for new technology to solve the problem, right? So I think it's a two-sided race that we are running at the moment.
Yeah, and it's encouraging to hear you say that, because I know both of you had positive experiences with retrofitting. Listen, we're running rapidly out of time, but I want you to know that from our community's perspective, this has been enormously insightful. So with the sort of the 3 minutes left, can I get each of you maybe to give us 30 seconds of sort of positive summary, so we can go out and take over the world with the Sea Cargo Charter at our side? Jan, you want to start?
Yeah, from my side, I would just encourage, and I do this on every occasion that I have, is the decarbonization is going to be the biggest challenge and opportunity in the next decade, right? Let's be honest around that. And I would just urge people to see this as an opportunity and to turn this into business models and new revenue streams, and not see this as a problem or a headache. So I really would encourage people to get on with it and get on the train and get moving.
Captain?
Well, Jim, the closing remarks be that as charterers, sometimes we are not owning the vessel, so there is a bit of, we acknowledge there's a bit of limitations on our side when it comes to doing actually with the assets or what we can do along with these things. But at the same time, we also acknowledge that we have the influence, that we can get the dial moving into the path of decarbonization, and that's what Sea Cargo Charter is one of the live examples in that space. And I think this maritime, and as already alluded to in my before answer, that I think the maritime industry needs to collaborate more than ever, given the urgency around the decarbonization, and needs to find the ways to standardize the operations which consistently flow across the industry. Sea Cargo Charter provides that platform for charterers, and it sets a standard for accounting and reporting the emissions, which enhances not only transparency, but it also provides consistency. Thanks.
Thank you. Eva?
Yeah, so I'll pick up from there, Captain. I'm also seeing this as a collaborative effort, definitely also as I started with. It's a question of every party within the shipping industry and throughout the chain to secure that we come together and we actually try to create these solutions, that we take collective responsibility, don't try to push responsibility around, because really what we are trying to do here is secure that shipping is also going to be a viable and sustainable means of transportation in the future. And I think that is the most important goal we have to lift.
And we've seen again and again as we come out of the pandemic just how fundamentally important the industry is. Lance, I'll give Joanna the last word as the secretary, but Lance, your thoughts?
Yeah. So we're in definitely interesting times, and people throw around like, oh, this is a once in a generation challenge, but this issue is probably even bigger than that, and it's not a spectator sport, right? We need everybody at the table bringing their best solutions, and so, for everybody in the audience, right, ask yourself like, what are you doing to be part of the solution? And if you're doing stuff, great, and if you're not, then welcome to the team, because like we need you.
That's going to be hard to
you,
top,
Lance.
Lance.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, welcome to the team. That's a big thing. No, I think that the big thing that I also see is like this really, the Sea Cargo Charter, the Poseidon Principles, Getting to Zero Coalition, like they really put like the zero emission future that we all are working towards in sort of line of sight, and builds confidence in the fact that together the sector can achieve it. I hope that the rest of the sector will join the team, that the IMO will respond accordingly to create the kind of framework that we need to move there together. Again, just seconding what Lance says. Welcome to the team.
And collaboration is a wonderful word to hear out of a broad spectrum of people's mouths. So listen, that brings us to the end of the hour. For those of you out there who are looking for immediate information on the Sea Cargo Charter, you can go to the side corner of GoToWebinar and download the document. And more importantly, you should all go and visit the seacargocharter.org website, where there's an access to just a ton of resources and information. And to all of you whose questions I couldn't get out, I couldn't get because I couldn't read them, those will all be sent to Joanna. And I am sure that in their inimitable way, they will be answered. You'll find the answers there. And with my CMA hat on, I'd like to echo what Joyce said. Please join us and go to cmashipping.org. And finally, I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists and close simply by saying that our industry has indeed put its best foot forward. Initiatives such as the Sea Cargo Charter, Poseidon Principles, the numerous national and regional coalitions committing to decarbonization, the projects, the technology, the fuel, the infrastructure pioneers, they're all truly an inspiration. And when John Kerry, the U.S. Special Envoy for Climate, pledged 2 weeks ago that the U.S. will join an international effort to achieve zero emissions, in the future, I doubt he knew he had allies such as you on his backside, ready to step forward with him. So listen, congratulations to all of you for your passion, your enthusiasm, and to all of you who joined us. I can't wait to see you all soon. And finally, let's remember our seafarers. Thank you all very much. And see you all later. Thank you.